After many long years beneath the roof of Laban, Jacob was no longer the empty-handed youth he once had been. Now he had wives, children, and flocks beyond counting, a wealth that stirred respect in the eyes of many. Yet behind this picture of prosperity, unseen currents began to rise. The eyes of Laban's sons grew restless, no longer warm but filled with envy. They whispered among themselves, "Jacob has taken all that belonged to our father. All this wealth should have been ours." The household that once offered shelter now grew heavy with suspicion, dark with unease. And in that very moment, God's voice was heard again, no longer faint, as in days past, but clear, insistent, commanding, "Return to the land of your fathers, to the place where my promise was first spoken." So another journey began, but this time, it was not the solitary flight of a wanderer pursued by fear. It was the pilgrimage of a family, carrying with them faith and hope, and walking toward trials yet unseen on the road ahead. Jacob heard the whispers of Laban's sons. "Jacob has taken everything that belonged to our father. From what was our father's wealth, he has made himself rich." And Jacob noticed that Laban's face was no longer as before. The welcome once warm had grown cold, and suspicion burned in his eyes. Then the Lord spoke to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers, to your own kin. I will be with you." So Jacob called Rachel and Leah out to the field where the flocks were grazing, and he said, "Your father no longer treats me as he once did, but the God of my father has been with me. You know I have served your father with all my strength, yet he has deceived me, changing my wages 10 times. Still, God did not let him harm me when he said, 'The speckled ones shall be your wages.' The flock bore speckled when he said, 'The striped shall be your wages.' The flock bore striped. God has taken your father's wealth and given it to me." Then Jacob told them of a dream. "I saw that all the rams mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, and spotted. And in the dream the angel of God called me, saying, 'I have seen all that Laban has done to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and made your vow to me. Now arise, leave this land, and return to your homeland.'" And Rachel and Leah answered, "Do we still have any share in our father's estate? He has treated us as foreigners, sold us, and consumed what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth God has taken from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you." Then Jacob arose, set his wives and children on camels, and gathered all his possessions, his livestock, his goods, everything he had acquired in Paddan Aram, quietly, without a word to Laban, and departed, making his way back to Canaan, the land of his fathers. But Rachel, unknown to Jacob, took her father's household gods, and Jacob slipped away, not telling Laban of his flight. They crossed the Euphrates and set their course toward the hill country of Gilead. Jacob's anger flared, and he rebuked Laban. "What is my crime? What sin have I committed that you pursue me so fiercely? You have searched through all my goods, What have you found of yours? Place it here before our kinsmen, and let them judge between us. For 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and she-goats never miscarried. I never fed on the rams of your flocks. What was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss myself. By day the scorching sun consumed me. By night the frost bit deep, and sleep fled from my eyes. 14 years I served you for your 2 daughters. 6 years for your flocks, and 10 times you changed my wages. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac had not been with me, surely now I would have been sent away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the labor of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. Laban answered, the women are my daughters. The children are my children. The flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do this day for my daughters or their children come? Let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between us. So they set up a heap of stones, and there they ate together. Laban named it Jagar-Sahadutha, while Jacob called it Gilead, the heap of witness. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. May the Lord watch between us when we are apart. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take other wives, though no man sees, God himself is witness between you and me. Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate and spent the night on the hill. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, blessed them, and returned to his home. As Jacob pressed on in his journey, the angels of God came to meet him. When he beheld them, Jacob exclaimed, this is the camp of God. So he named that place Mahanaim, 2 camps. It was a sign he did not walk alone, for the armies of heaven marched beside him. Jacob then sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir. He instructed them, say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban until now. I have cattle, donkeys, flocks, male and female servants. I send this message to seek favor in your eyes. The messengers returned with troubling news. We went to your brother Esau. He is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. The tidings struck Jacob like lightning. Fear and anguish gripped him. He divided the people with him, along with the flocks, herds, and camels, into 2 companies, saying to himself, if Esau comes and strikes one company, the other may yet escape. In his dread, Jacob lifted up his voice to God in prayer. O Lord, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, you who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good. I am unworthy of all the mercies and faithfulness you have shown your servant, for I crossed this Jordan with nothing but my staff, and now I have become 2 camps. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I fear him that he may come and strike me down, mother and children alike. Yet you have spoken, saying, I will surely do you good. and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, too numerous to count. Oh, Jacob prepared a rich gift for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 males, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 males. He placed them into the hands of his servants, each herd by itself, and instructed them, "Go on ahead of me, and keep some distance between each herd. When my brother Esau meets you and asks, 'To whom do you belong? Where are you going? Whose animals are these before you?' then you shall say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau. And behold, he himself is behind us.'" For Jacob thought, "I will appease him with the gift that goes ahead of me. Afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me." That night, Jacob arose and took his wives, his children, his servants, and all his possessions across the ford of the Jabbok. When all had passed over, he remained alone in the darkness. And there, a mysterious man came and wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck the socket of Jacob's hip, wrenching it from its place. Yet Jacob clung with all his strength, refusing to let go. The man said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked, "What is your name?" He answered, "Jacob." The man declared, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, he who wrestles with God, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed." Jacob said, "Tell me your name, I pray." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning face of God. For he said, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been spared." As the sun rose upon him, Jacob crossed over Peniel, limping because of his injured hip. At dawn, Jacob lifted his eyes and saw Esau approaching, 400 men at his side. Fear welled up within him once more. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. The maidservants and their children went first. Leah and her children followed, and last came Rachel with young Joseph. But Jacob himself went on ahead. As he drew near to his brother, he bowed to the ground 7 times, each bow a plea for mercy, each lowering of himself a sign of reverence and repentance. And then, contrary to all his fears, Esau ran toward him. He embraced his brother, fell upon his neck, and kissed him, and together they wept. In that moment, years of anger and bitterness melted away, replaced by the bond of brotherhood restored. Esau lifted his eyes and saw the women and children. He asked, "Who are these with you?" Jacob replied, "They are the children whom God, in his grace, has given to your servant." Then the maidservants and their children came near and bowed low. Leah also came forward with her children, and they bowed. Last came Rachel and Joseph, and they too bowed before Esau. Esau asked, "What do you mean by all this company I met along the way?" Jacob answered, "It was to find favor in the eyes of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough. My brother, keep what is yours." Yet Jacob insisted, "No, please, if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from my hand. For to see your face is as though I have seen the face of God, and you have received me with kindness. Please accept the blessing brought to you, for God has dealt graciously with me, and I have all I need." So Esau accepted what Jacob offered. Esau said, "Let us journey on together. I will go with you." But Jacob replied, "My Lord knows the children are frail, and the flocks and herds that are nursing are delicate. If they are driven too hard for even a single day, they will perish. Please, my Lord, go on ahead of your servant. I will move at a gentler pace, according to the stride of the children and the rhythm of the flocks, until I come to my Lord in Seir." Esau answered, "Then let me leave some of my men with you." But Jacob said, "There is no need. It is enough for me that I have found favor in your sight." So Esau turned back that same day and returned to Seir. Jacob, however, journeyed to Succoth, where he built a house for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place was called Succoth, meaning shelters. Afterward, Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, in the land of Canaan, and camped just outside the city. There he purchased the parcel of land where he pitched his tent from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 silver pieces. And Jacob set up an altar there and called it El Elohe, Israel God, the God of Israel. This encounter stands as living proof that God can transform the human heart. Hatred can become forgiveness, and fear can be turned into peace. Jacob's bowing to the ground spoke of humility. Esau's embrace declared that brotherhood can rise above the wounds of the past. When Jacob confessed, "To see your face is like seeing the face of God," his words revealed a deeper truth. Forgiveness itself is a mark of the divine presence. And the altar raised at Shechem bore witness once more that the journey of Israel was never merely a family tale, but a history forever entwined with the faithful companionship of God. When Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, went out one day to visit the young women of the land, tragedy struck. She was seen by Shechem, son of Hamor, the ruler of that region. Overcome by desire, he seized her, violated her, and yet afterward clung to her in longing. Shechem spoke tenderly to Dinah, trying to soothe her, and then turned to his father with urgency. "Get me this girl as my wife." When Jacob heard that his daughter had been defiled, his heart broke within him, yet he held his peace, waiting for his sons to return from the fields. And when they did, and the news was told, their fury burned like fire. For such a disgrace had been committed in Israel, an outrage that could not be endured. Hamor, the father of Shechem, came to Jacob, pleading, "My son longs for your daughter. Give her to him as wife. Let us make marriage alliances together. You give us your daughters, and take ours for yourselves." dwell among us, and the land shall be wide open before you." Shechem himself added, "With passion, let me find favor in your eyes. Whatever bride price or gift you demand, I will give, only grant me the young woman as my wife." But the sons of Jacob answered with cunning, "We cannot give our sister to one who is uncircumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent: if every male among you is circumcised as we are, then we will give you our daughters, and take yours, and dwell with you as one people. But if you will not listen, we will take our sister and depart." Their words pleased Hamor and Shechem. The young man, burning with desire, lost no time, for his soul was bound to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. Hamor and Shechem came to the city gate and spoke to the people in a voice like a plea wrapped in counsel. "These folk are one with us. Let them dwell among us and trade in our market. The land is wide enough for them. We will give our daughters to them in marriage, and take their daughters for ourselves. Only this one thing do we ask: let every male among you be circumcised, even as they are. Then their flocks, their wealth, and their beasts will become ours. Consent now, that they may settle in our midst." The townsfolk listened, and the word pleased them. One by one, the men submitted, and all the males in the city underwent the painful rite. On the third day, while their wounds still smarted, Simeon and Levi, sons of Jacob, brothers of Dinah, drew their swords and rushed into the city. With fierce purpose, they fell upon the men and cut them down. Hamor and Shechem themselves were slain. They took Dinah from Shechem's house and departed. Then Jacob's other sons poured forth upon the town like a tempest, because their sister had been dishonored. They plundered the city and the fields beyond. They carried off sheep and oxen and asses, and seized the silver, the gold, and every household treasure. Women and children were taken captive. Houses were stripped bare. When the fury had spent itself and the dust began to settle, Jacob rebuked Simeon and Levi in a voice torn with fear. "You have brought trouble upon me. You have made me odious to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites alike. I am but a little band. Should they unite against me? My house, and I will be destroyed." They answered him, fierce and unrepentant, "Should our sister be treated as a whore after the sorrowful bloodshed at Shechem?" The voice of the Lord came again to Jacob, firm and clear as a summons from eternity. "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Build an altar to me, the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." It was a call not merely to travel, but to return to the very place where Jacob had first seen heaven open in his dream of the ladder, to renew faith, and to bind once more the covenant with the Almighty. Jacob gathered his household and all who journeyed with him, and spoke with solemn command, "Put away the foreign gods among you. Purify yourselves. Put on new garments, for we will rise and go to Bethel. There I shall build an altar to the God who answered me in the day of distress, and who has been with me in every step of the way." They brought to Jacob their idols and their earrings, tokens of the old life. and he buried them under the great oak near Shechem, leaving them behind as one buries the past. As they set forth, the dread of God fell upon the surrounding towns, so none dared pursue them. Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, with all his company. There he raised an altar and called the place El Bethel, God of the house of God. And there, under the shadow of an oak, Deborah, the nurse of Rebekah, died and was buried. They named the tree Allon Bakuth, the oak of weeping. Once more, the Almighty appeared to Jacob and blessed him. He said, "Your name is Jacob, but no longer shall you be called Jacob. Israel shall be your name." Then he declared with sovereign power, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you. Kings shall rise from your line. The land I gave to Abraham and to Isaac, I give to you and to your descendants after you." Jacob set up a pillar of stone at the place where God had spoken with him. Upon it he poured out wine as an offering and oil as a consecration, and he called the place Bethel, the house of God. When they journeyed on from Bethel, Rachel fell into hard labor. The pangs were bitter, and as her life slipped away, the midwife whispered gently, "Do not fear, for you have borne yet another son." With her final breath, Rachel named him Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow. But Jacob, lifting the child into his arms, called him Benjamin, son of my right hand. Rachel died there, and they buried her by the road to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar over her grave, and the stone still stood in remembrance in the days of those who came after. Yet sorrow upon sorrow fell. For Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, defiled his father's bed by lying with Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant. The grief pierced Jacob's heart like a hidden dagger. These are the sons of Jacob, 12 in number, the forefathers of Israel, sons of Leah: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, sons of Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin, sons of Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid Dan and Naphtali, sons of Zilpah, Leah's handmaid Gad and Asher. From them would rise the 12 tribes, each carrying its share of promise and burden. At last, Jacob came again to his father Isaac, at Mamre near Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had once sojourned. Isaac lived 180 years, and he breathed his last old and full of days, gathered to his people and his 2 sons, Esau and Jacob, stood side by side and laid him to rest in the tomb of their fathers. Returning to Bethel was more than a journey across the land, it was a pilgrimage back to faith. After so many trials, Jacob and his household were called to be cleansed, to cast away foreign gods, and to renew the covenant with the one who had never abandoned them. Once again, the Lord spoke Jacob's new name, Israel. This was no mere title, but a seal upon his life. He was no longer the deceiver, but the forefather of a nation chosen to bear God's promise. Yet even as hope deepened, Sorrow pierced the path. Rachel, beloved of Jacob, breathed her last while giving birth to Benjamin. Out of grief came new life, and from her loss emerged a tribe destined to hold a place of honor among the children of Israel. And then Isaac, the quiet patriarch, went to his rest, closing the chapter of one generation and opening the dawn of a new era. From this moment, the story of Israel would unfold more fully. A people shaped by covenant, carried by promise, and led by the hand of the living God. Esau, also called Edom, took wives from among the daughters of Canaan: Adah, daughter of Elon the Hittite; Oholibama, granddaughter of Zibeon the Hivite; and Basemath, daughter of Ishmael, sister of Nebaioth. Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau. Basemath bore Royal. Oholibama bore Jush, Jalam, and Korah. These were the sons of Esau, born to him in the land of Canaan. But Esau, with his wives, his sons and daughters, his household, and his herds, departed from the land of Canaan and settled in the hill country of Seir. For his possessions were too many to dwell side by side with Jacob. The land could not support them both. Thus Esau made his dwelling in Seir. And Esau became the father of the nation of Edom. Eliphaz, son of Adah, fathered Teman, Omar, Zephu, Gatam, and Kenaz. He also fathered Amalek, born through Timnah. His concubine, Hoyah, son of Basemath, fathered Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, and Mizah. Oholibama bore Jush, Jalam, and Korah. From these arose the chiefs and leaders of the clans of Edom. The lineages of Esau are written to affirm that he too became a great nation, just as the Lord had spoken to Abraham that both Ishmael and Esau, though not sons of the covenant, would rise as fathers of many peoples, before ever Israel had kings. The land of Edom had its rulers Bela, Jobab, Hosham, Adad, Samlah, Shaul, Baalhanan, and Hadar. Their names remain as markers of a truth that Edom was formed early into a nation with order and strength, dwelling in Seir among the Horites, whose clans Lotan, Sibeon, Ano, Dishan, Ezer, and Dishan mingled with the sons of Esau until the people became one. Thus the chronicles remember Esau, the brother who parted ways, did not vanish into silence, but became the father of a people, the nation of Edom. Jacob settled in Canaan, the land of his fathers. Among all his sons he loved Joseph most, for Joseph was the child of his old age, the son of Rachel, the wife he cherished. To Joseph he gave a splendid robe, woven in many colors, a visible token of his favor. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than the rest, jealousy kindled in their hearts. They could not find a kind word for him. One day Joseph told them a dream: "We were binding sheaves out in the field. My sheaf rose up and stood erect, while your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to mine. Fury flared among the brothers. So you would reign over us, they hissed. Would you rule over us? Later Joseph dreamed again and spoke the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me. When he repeated this to his father and brothers, his father scolded him. What kind of dream is this? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed bow down to you? Their envy only deepened, though Jacob kept these words tucked away in his heart. One day Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending the flocks near Shechem. From a distance they saw him approaching and whispered together, "Look, the dreamer is coming. Now is our chance. Let us kill him and throw him into a pit. Then we will say a wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben, the eldest, intervened, seeking a way to save the boy. He said, "Do not take his life. Cast him instead into this cistern in the wilderness. But do not harm him." He meant to rescue Joseph later. When Joseph reached them, they stripped him of the robe of many colors and cast him into an empty pit. No water lay at its bottom. As the brothers sat to eat, they lifted their eyes and saw a caravan approaching a band of Ishmaelite traders coming from Gilead. Their camels were laden with spices, balm, and myrrh, bound for the markets of Egypt. Then Judah spoke, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. He is our own flesh and blood. Our hands need not be stained." The brothers agreed. They drew Joseph from the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. Bound and bewildered, the dreamer was carried away toward Egypt. When Reuben returned and found the pit empty, he tore his garments in anguish. Rushing back to his brothers, he cried, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" To conceal their crime, they took Joseph's splendid robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the garment in its blood. Bringing it to their father, they said, "We found this. Look, see if it is your son's robe or not." Jacob recognized it and wailed, "It is my son's robe. A wild beast has devoured him. My Joseph is torn to pieces." In grief, he tore his own clothes, wrapped himself in sackcloth, and mourned many days. Though his children tried to comfort him, he refused consolation, crying out, "I will go down to Sheol, mourning for my son." And so the father wept. While far away, Joseph was sold into the house of Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard in Egypt. In those days, Judah, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, departed from his brothers and settled near a man of Adullam, whose name was Hira. There he took to wife the daughter of a Canaanite, and she bore him 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. When the firstborn, came of age, Judah gave him a wife, and her name was Tamar. But was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord struck him down. By custom, it fell to Onan, the second son, to raise up offspring for his brother. Yet Onan knowing that the child would not be reckoned as his own, spilled his seed upon the ground whenever he went into her. This too was evil in the Lord's sight, and he also struck Onan down. Judah then said to Tamar, "Return to your father's house. Remain a widow until my youngest, Shelah, is grown." But Judah feared lest Shelah also die, and in his heart he had no intention of giving him to her. So Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house, shrouded in loneliness. Many years passed, and Judah's own wife died. When his mourning was ended, he went up to Timnah with his friend Hira to shear his sheep. When Tamar heard of it, she cast aside her widow's garments, veiled her face, and sat by the gate at Enaim. Judah, seeing her veiled, supposed her to be a harlot. He turned aside to her and said, "Let me come in to you." Tamar asked, "What will you give me, that you may come in to me?" He answered, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." She replied, "Will you give me a pledge until you send it?" Judah said, "What pledge shall I give you?" And Tamar answered, "Your seal, your cord, and the staff that is in your hand." Judah gave Tamar the pledge, and he went in to her, and she conceived. Later, Judah sent his friend with the young goat to retrieve the pledge, but she was nowhere to be found. The people of that place said, "There has been no harlot here." 3 months passed, and word was brought to Judah, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Behold, she is with child." Judah, burning with anger, declared, "Bring her out and let her be burned." As they brought her forth, Tamar sent word to Judah, saying, "The man to whom these belong is the father of my child. Look whose seal, cord, and staff are these." Judah recognized them and confessed, "She is more righteous than I, for I did not give her to my son Shelah." And he did not lie with her again. When the time came for Tamar to give birth, behold, twins were in her womb. As she labored, one child thrust out a hand, and the midwife tied a scarlet thread around it, saying, "This one came out first." But the hand drew back, and his brother emerged instead. The midwife exclaimed, "What a breach you have made for yourself." So he was called Perez, the breach. Afterward, his brother came out with the scarlet thread upon his hand, and he was called Zerah, the rising. Joseph was carried down into Egypt and sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. Yet the Lord was with Joseph, and whatever he put his hand to prospered. Potiphar saw this and trusted him fully, setting Joseph over his entire household. From that day, the blessing of the Lord rested upon Potiphar's house, upon his fields, his flocks, to his servants, so that all increased. Potiphar concerned himself with nothing but the food he ate. All else was in Joseph's care. Joseph was young, strong, and of striking appearance. The wife of Potiphar cast longing eyes upon him, whispering again and again, "Lie with me." But Joseph refused, saying, "Behold, my master has entrusted me with everything in his house. He holds nothing back from me except you, for you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Day after day she pressed him, but he would not yield. At last, when the house was empty, she seized his garment and cried, "Lie with me, Joseph," tore himself away, leaving the garment in her hand, and fled outside, shamed and furious. She summoned the servants, declaring, "See, he has brought a Hebrew into this house to make sport of us. He came to violate me." But I cried aloud, and he fled, leaving his garment beside me. When Potiphar returned, she laid the garment before him and repeated her charge. Wrath flamed in his heart, and he cast Joseph into the prison where the king's prisoners were bound. But even in chains, the Lord was with Joseph. He granted him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. The keeper entrusted all the prisoners to Joseph's hand. Whatever was done there, Joseph directed it. The keeper troubled himself with nothing, for the Lord was with Joseph, and all that he did the Lord made to prosper. This passage reveals the faithfulness of Joseph in the face of temptation. He chose loyalty to God over fleeting pleasures. Though falsely accused and cast into prison, Joseph never lost his faith. And it was within the darkness of that prison that the light of God shone even brighter. Here lies a profound lesson. True honor is not bestowed by men, but preserved by God himself. He transforms even injustice into the very stepping stones of his greater plan. After some time had passed, the cupbearer and the chief baker of Egypt offended Pharaoh. In his wrath, the king cast them into prison, the very place where Joseph was confined under the charge of the captain of the guard. The warden placed them under Joseph's care, and he attended to them. One night, each of them dreamed a dream, each dream with its own meaning. When morning came, Joseph noticed their faces heavy with sorrow. He asked, "Why are you downcast today?" They replied, "We have both dreamed a dream, yet there is no one to interpret them." Joseph answered, "Are not interpretations from God? Tell them to me, I pray you." Then the chief cupbearer spoke. "In my dream I saw a vine before me. On the vine were 3 branches. As it budded, its blossoms opened, and clusters of ripe grapes appeared. I had Pharaoh's cup in my hand. I took the grapes, pressed them into the cup, and placed it in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph said, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your post. You will once again place the cup into the hand of the king, just as you did before." And Joseph pleaded earnestly, "When it is well with you, remember me. Speak a word on my behalf to Pharaoh, that I may be brought out of this prison, for I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews. And even here, I have done nothing deserving of these chains." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he too said to Joseph, "In my dream, there were 3 baskets of bread upon my head. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds came and ate them from the basket above me." Joseph answered, "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head, and you will be hanged upon a tree, and the birds will feast upon your flesh." And it came to pass, on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, that he prepared a banquet for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the midst of his court. The cupbearer was restored to his office, once again placing the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but the baker was hanged, just as Joseph had foretold. Yet the chief cupbearer forgot Joseph and did not remember him. 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed a dream. In the first vision, he stood by the river Nile. From the waters rose 7 cows, sleek and fat, grazing upon the reeds. Then, behold, 7 other cows came up from the river, gaunt and ugly. The thin, hideous cows devoured the 7 fat ones, yet remained as wretched as before. In the second vision, Pharaoh saw 7 heads of grain, plump and full, springing forth on a single stalk. After them sprouted 7 thin heads, scorched by the east wind, and the thin heads swallowed up the full ones. Pharaoh awoke, his spirit troubled. He summoned the magicians and the wise men of Egypt, yet none could interpret the dream. Then the chief cupbearer remembered and said to Pharaoh, "Today I recall my offenses. When the king was angry with me and the chief baker, we were imprisoned. There, with us, was a young Hebrew servant. We each had a dream, and he interpreted them as he declared. So it came to pass I was restored to my post, and the baker was hanged. Pharaoh sent for Joseph. They hurried him out of the dungeon. He was shaved, given fresh garments, and brought before the king. Pharaoh said, "I have dreamed a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you, that you can hear a dream and make it known." Joseph answered, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace." Pharaoh recounted his 2 dreams, and Joseph said, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed what he is about to do. The 7 fat cows and the 7 full ears are 7 years of abundance. The 7 gaunt cows and the 7 withered ears are 7 years of famine to follow." The doubling of the dream means the matter has been firmly established by God, and he will bring it to pass swiftly. Joseph then spoke with wisdom, "Let Pharaoh appoint a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. In the 7 years of abundance, let 1/5 of the harvest be gathered and stored in the cities, as a reserve for the 7 years of famine that shall follow. Thus the land shall not perish in the hunger to come." The counsel pleased Pharaoh and all his court, and Pharaoh declared, "Can we find such a one as this? A man in whom is the Spirit of God. Since God has revealed all this to you, none is as wise and discerning as you. You shall be over my house, and at your command all my people shall submit. Only in the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh removed the signet ring from his hand and placed it upon Joseph's finger. He clothed him in robes of fine linen, set a golden chain about his neck, and made him ride in the second chariot of the kingdom. Before him men cried out, "Bow the knee." Pharaoh named him Zaphanath-Paneah, the God who speaks and gives life, and gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and the land flourished. In the 7 years of plenty, the earth brought forth abundantly. Joseph gathered grain as the sand of the sea, until they ceased counting, for it could not be measured, before the famine struck. Asenath bore Joseph 2 sons. The first he named Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." The second he named Ephraim, saying, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Then the years of abundance passed, and famine swept over all lands. Yet in all Egypt there was bread. When the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he said, "Go to Joseph, what he says to you, do." Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, and the famine spread across the face of the earth. From every nation they came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, for the hunger was severe in all lands. From the darkness of the prison, Joseph was lifted to the rank of prime minister, proving that God can turn the course of destiny in but a single moment. The wisdom Joseph displayed was not his own, but flowed from the Spirit of God, so that all who beheld him might recognize the hand of the divine. The 7 years of abundance and the 7 years of famine teach us this truth: life carries seasons of plenty and seasons of want. Yet those who prepare their hearts in the peace of God will not tremble when hardship comes. And this was but the beginning of a greater design, for through the famine, Joseph's brothers would be drawn into Egypt, and the entire household of Israel would be preserved. The famine raged across the land. In Canaan, Jacob heard word that grain was to be found in Egypt. He turned to his sons and said, "Why do you stand here idle? I have been told there is grain in Egypt. Go down there. Buy us food so that we may live and not perish." 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to Egypt. Benjamin, the youngest, Jacob would not let go. Fear gripped the father's heart for the boy's safety. The brothers entered Egypt and stood before Joseph, now ruler of the land, the one who sold grain to the people. They bowed low, faces to the ground. In that instant, the dream of Joseph's youth rose before him, the sheaves bowing, the stars prostrating. He recognized them, but they did not recognize him. Joseph kept a stern face and spoke sharply. "Where do you come from?" they answered. "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." He accused them. "No, you are spies. You have come to scout the weakness of the land." But they pleaded, "No, my lord, your servants have come only to buy food. We are all the sons of one man, honest men. We are no spies." They told him their story. "We are 12 brothers, sons of one father in Canaan. One is no more, and the youngest remains with our father." Yet Joseph held to his charge. "No, you are spies." Then he declared the test. "In Pharaoh's name you shall not leave this place until your youngest brother comes." Send one of you back and fetch him. The rest shall be kept imprisoned, so that we may know whether the words you spoke are true. If so, you shall live." He confined them there for 3 days. On the 3rd day Joseph spoke again. "I revere God," he said. "This is the way you shall live. Leave one of you here as a prisoner, and take grain back to your starving households. Then bring your youngest brother to me. So shall your words be tested, and you shall not die." They agreed, in whispers among themselves, in the old tongue of home. They said, "Truly, we are punished for our brother. We saw his anguish when he pleaded, and we would not listen. Now calamity has come upon us." Reuben answered, "Was I not the one who warned you not to sin against the child you would not heed? Now we must pay the price of his blood." They did not know that Joseph understood. He heard them through the hands of interpreters. Hearing this, Joseph turned away and wept, then composed himself and spoke to them again. He chose Simeon to remain imprisoned and released the others. Joseph commanded his servants, "Fill their sacks with grain. Return the silver into the mouths of their sacks, and provide them food for their journey." They set out. When at last a man opened his sack and found the silver lying there, terror seized them, and they cried, "What has God done to us?" On their return to Canaan, they told Jacob everything, the harsh charge Simeon held in bonds, and the demand that Benjamin be brought forth. When they emptied the sacks and saw the silver, fear shook them to the core. Jacob tore his garments in anguish and cried out, "You have taken everything from me. Joseph is gone, and now Simeon is gone, and you would have me send Benjamin. All things fall upon me." Reuben replied, "Father, give him to me. Let me bring him back. If I do not, you may put my 2 sons to death. I will be responsible for him." But Jacob was resolute. "My son shall not go down there with you. His brother is dead. He alone remains. If harm befalls him, my gray head will go down to Sheol in sorrow." The famine pressed harder upon the land. The grain the sons of Jacob had brought was gone, and their father said to them, "Go once more, buy us a little food." But Judah answered, "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your youngest brother is with you. If you send the boy with us, we will go down and buy food. But if you will not send him, we will not go.' For the man said, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.'" Jacob groaned, "Why did you tell the man you had another brother?" They replied, "The man questioned us earnestly about ourselves and our kindred. 'Is your father still alive? Have you another brother?' We answered as truth compelled us. How could we know he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" Then Judah said to his father, "Send the boy with me, and we shall live and not die, we and you and our little ones. I will be surety for him. From my hand you shall demand him. If I do not bring him back, let me bear the blame forever." If we had not delayed, by now we could have gone and returned twice. Jacob, weary of grief, at last resolved, "If it must be so, Then do this: take of the choicest produce of the land, balm, honey, spices, myrrh, pistachio, and almonds, a gift for the man. Take double silver in your hands, and the silver returned in your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise. Go again to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before him, that he may release Simeon and Benjamin. But as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. Thus the brothers took double silver, gifts from the land, and Benjamin their youngest. They went down into Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph lifted his eyes and beheld Benjamin, his own mother's son, his heart trembled within him. He turned quickly to his steward and said, "Bring these men into my house, slaughter and prepare, for at noon they shall eat with me." But when the brothers were led into Joseph's house, fear seized them. They whispered one to another, "It is because of the silver returned in our sacks. He will accuse us, fall upon us, and take us as slaves with our donkeys." They approached the steward, explaining anxiously how they had found the silver in their bags on the journey home. The steward answered them gently, "Peace be to you. Do not fear. Your God and the God of your father placed treasure in your sacks. As for your silver, I received it." Then he brought Simeon out to them. They were given water to wash their feet and fodder for their beasts. When Joseph entered, they presented the gifts they had brought, bowing themselves low to the ground. He asked after their welfare, "How fares your father? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive?" They answered, "Your servant, our father, is alive. He is in good health." Then Joseph's gaze fell upon Benjamin, his own brother by Rachel. He said, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke? May God be gracious to you, my son, overcome with love." Joseph hurried out to his chamber and wept there. After washing his face, he returned, restraining himself, and commanded that the meal be set. The brothers were seated before him in order of birth, from the eldest to the youngest, and they marveled at it. Portions were brought to them from Joseph's table, yet Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. Their fear eased for a moment, yet they did not know that a greater trial was soon to be laid upon them. The night had passed, and morning light touched the land of Egypt. Joseph, still veiling his true identity, called for his steward and said, "Fill the men's sacks with as much grain as they can carry. Place each man's silver back into the mouth of his sack. But in the youngest one's sack, place my silver cup, the vessel from which I drink, the cup by which I divine. Do as I command." And so it was done. The brothers rose at dawn, loaded their donkeys, and set out from the city. Their hearts were lighter, for Simeon had been restored. Benjamin walked beside them, and they carried grain for their families. But before they had gone far, Joseph gave a command, "Arise, pursue them. When you overtake them, say, Why have you repaid good with evil? Is this not the cup my master drinks from, the very cup by which he discerns? You have done wickedly in this." The steward caught up with them, spoke as commanded. The brothers were astonished and cried, "Far be it from us, my lord. We brought back the silver found in our sacks. Why then would we steal silver or gold? Search us. If any man is found with the cup, let him die, and the rest of us will be your slaves." The steward replied gently, "Let it be as you say. The one with whom the cup is found shall be my master's slave. The rest shall go free." They hastened to lower their sacks. Each man. The search began with the eldest and ended with the youngest. And there it was. The silver cup gleamed in the sack of Benjamin. Silence fell. Their garments were torn in grief. Each man reloaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. Joseph was still in his house when they entered. Falling before him to the ground, he said with solemn voice, "What deed is this you have done? Did you not know that a man like me can surely divine?" Judah, trembling, spoke, "What can we say? My lord, what words can justify us? God has uncovered the guilt of your servants. Here we are, my lord's slaves, both we and the one with whom the cup was found." But Joseph declared, "Far be it from me to act so. Only the man with whom the cup was found shall be my slave. The rest of you, go up in peace to your father." The hall was hushed. Judah's plea still lingered in the air like incense. His words heavy with love, sacrifice, and truth. Joseph's heart could bear no more. He turned away from his brothers, tears welling up like a flood. He cried out to the attendants, "Leave me. Let no man remain with me." And when they had gone, Joseph wept aloud so loudly that even the Egyptians outside heard, and news reached the house of Pharaoh. Then Joseph turned to his brothers, his voice trembling, filled with both sorrow and joy. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer, for they were struck dumb with fear and wonder. Joseph drew near and said again times, "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. But do not be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves for what you did. For it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, the famine has ravaged the land, and 5 years remain without plowing or harvest. But God sent me before you to preserve a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over all Egypt. Hurry, return to my father, and tell him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay.'" Joseph's arms opened wide. He fell upon Benjamin, weeping, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. He kissed all his brothers and embraced them, and afterward they spoke together. The long silence of years was broken. What once was betrayal had become reunion. What once was grief had become hope. News soon reached Pharaoh's palace. "Joseph's brothers have come. Pharaoh and his servants were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers, load your beasts and return to Canaan. Take your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land." And so Joseph gave them carts, provisions for the journey, and garments. To Benjamin he gave 300 silver pieces and 5 sets of clothes. He sent them away with a blessing, saying, "Do not quarrel on the way." The brothers departed, carrying a message of impossible joy. And in the tents of Canaan, an old man would soon hear words he thought he would never hear again. "Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." At first Jacob's heart fainted, for he could not believe them. But when he saw the wagons Joseph had sent, and heard the words of his sons, the spirit of their father revived. And Israel said, "Enough, my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Israel, the aged father, gathered his household, and they set out on the road toward Egypt. When they came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And in the night, God spoke to Israel in a vision, "Jacob, Jacob." He replied, "Here I am." Then God said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I, myself, will go down with you, and I will surely bring you up again. And Joseph's own hand shall close your eyes." The old man's heart was strengthened. Fear turned into quiet trust. He knew this journey was not an exile, but the next step in God's promise. Jacob rose, and his sons placed their father, their little ones, and their wives on the wagons Pharaoh had sent. They carried their livestock and possessions, and with one accord, the family of Israel journeyed toward Egypt. 70 souls in all, the seed of a people, small in number but carrying within them the destiny of nations. The sons of Israel, the grandsons, the daughters, and the sons' daughters all came with Jacob. None were left behind, for this was not the story of a single man, but of a chosen family being carried into history by the hand of God. As they drew near to Goshen, Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet his father. When he appeared before him, he fell on his neck and wept a long while. And Israel said through tears, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, and know that you are still alive." It was not the cry of despair, but the sigh of fulfillment. Years of grief melted into the joy of a single embrace. Joseph said to his brothers and his father's household times, "I will go up and speak to Pharaoh. I will say, my brothers and my father's household have come to me from Canaan. They are shepherds, keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and herds. When Pharaoh calls you and asks your occupation, you shall say, 'Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were before us.' Then you shall dwell in the land of Goshen. For shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians." And so God prepared a place for his people, a place apart, where they could live and grow, sheltered from the world's corruption, yet cradled in his providence. This chapter is not merely about travel, but about God's reassurance: do not be afraid. Israel, weary with years, found courage not in strength of his own, but in the promise that God would walk with him. The reunion of father and son is a foretaste of a greater truth, that God restores what is lost and brings joy where sorrow seemed final. It is a lullaby of faith, that every journey begun in fear may end in embrace, that every exile may yet be a homecoming in the hands of God. Joseph went before Pharaoh and said, "My father and brothers have come from the land of Canaan. They have brought their flocks and herds, and all they possess, and now they are in the land of Goshen." He chose 5 of his brothers to stand before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked them, "What is your occupation?" They answered with humble voices, "Your servants are shepherds, as were our fathers before us. We have come to sojourn in your land, for the famine weighs heavy upon Canaan, and there is no pasture for our flocks. Therefore we ask, let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." Pharaoh turned to Joseph and said, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Let them settle in the best of the land, in Goshen. If you know capable men among them, set them as overseers of my livestock." Then Joseph brought Jacob, his aged father, and presented him before Pharaoh. The old patriarch lifted his hands and blessed the king of Egypt. Pharaoh asked, "How many are the years of your life?" Jacob answered, "The years of my sojourning are 130. Few and hard have been the days of my life, and they have not attained to the days of my fathers in their sojourning." And Jacob blessed Pharaoh once more before departing. So Joseph settled his father and brothers in Egypt, giving them property in the best of the land, the district of Ramses. As Pharaoh commanded, he provided food for them, according to the number of their households and little ones, while famine raged in every land. In Goshen, the family of Israel found rest and safety. What was once desperation had become abundance, for God's hand was upon them. Yet outside Goshen, the famine pressed sore upon Egypt and Canaan. The people came to Joseph, crying, "Give us bread, for why should we die before your eyes?" Joseph gathered all the silver of Egypt and Canaan in exchange for grain, and he brought the silver into Pharaoh's house. When their silver was gone, they came again, "Buy us and our livestock, and give us bread." So Joseph took their horses, flocks, herds, and donkeys in exchange for grain. The next year they said, "There is nothing left before my Lord but our bodies and our land. Buy us and our fields, and give us seed that we may live and not die." Thus Joseph acquired all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. The people became servants of Pharaoh from one end of Egypt to the other except the priests, for they had a fixed allotment and were not sold. Joseph said to the people, "Here is seed for you. Sow the land. At harvest, give a fifth to Pharaoh, and keep 4 parts for seed, for food, and for your households." They replied with gratitude, "You have saved our lives. May we find favor in your eyes, and we will be Pharaoh's servants." So Joseph made it a statute that a fifth of the produce belonged to Pharaoh, a decree that stood in Egypt for generations. Meanwhile, Israel dwelt in the land of Goshen. They gained possessions, grew fruitful, and multiplied exceedingly. 70 souls had entered the land. Now, they began to flourish as a nation. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years. His days were 147 years in all. And when his time drew near, he called for Joseph and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand beneath my thigh and promise me this kindness. Do not bury me in Egypt. When I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their tomb." Joseph swore to him, and Israel bowed in worship upon the head of his staff. Here, Jacob blesses Pharaoh, showing that even the mightiest ruler receives blessing from the covenant-bearer of God. Joseph's wisdom preserved nations, proving that God's Spirit can guide one faithful heart to feed millions. Israel rested in Goshen, a refuge amid famine, a cradle where God would form his people into a great nation. The old man's request not to be buried in Egypt reminds us, even in times of prosperity, the people of God long for the promise of their true homeland. After these things, word was brought to Joseph, "Behold, your father is ill." Joseph took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and went to Jacob. When Israel was told, "Your son Joseph has come to you," he summoned his strength, sat up on the bed, and spoke with the weight of years and the fire of memory. "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz, in the land of Canaan, and blessed me. He said, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and will give this land to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession.'" 4. Then Jacob looked upon Joseph's sons, the children born in Egypt, and declared, "Now your 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children born after them shall be yours. But these 2 shall be reckoned with me." Israel's eyes had grown dim with age, and he could not see clearly. Joseph brought his sons near, and Jacob kissed them, embraced them, and said with a voice trembling yet full of joy, "I never expected to see your face again, and behold, God has let me see your children also." Joseph bowed low with his face to the ground. Then he positioned his sons Manasseh, the firstborn, at Jacob's right hand, and Ephraim, the younger, at his left. He brought them close, but Israel stretched out his hands, crossing them, placing his right hand on the head of Ephraim, the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh, the elder. And Jacob blessed Joseph, saying, **, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil. Bless the boys. Let my name be carried on in them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." Joseph saw that his father placed the right hand on Ephraim, and it displeased him. He tried to lift it away. "Not so, my father," For this is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. But Jacob refused, saying with calm conviction, I know, my son, I know, he too shall become a people, and he too shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them that day, saying, By you Israel will bless, saying, May God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. Thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you, and will bring you back to the land of your fathers. To you, more than to your brothers, I give one mountain slope that I took from the Amorites with sword and bow. And with those words, Jacob wove the destiny of Joseph's sons into the covenant story, a story greater than Egypt, greater than famine, greater even than death. When the days of Jacob drew near, he called his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in days to come. Assemble, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. And so the 12 gathered around their father's bed, waiting in silence as he spoke words that would shape their future. Reuben, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power, yet unstable as water. You shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed and defiled it. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let my soul not enter their counsel. For in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob, and disperse them in Israel. Judah, Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub from the prey. My son, you have gone up. He crouches. He lies down as a lion who dares rouse him. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and to him shall be the obedience of the nations. He ties his foal to the vine, his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. Zebulun shall dwell by the seashore. He shall be a haven for ships, and his border shall reach toward Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that the resting place was good and the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the roadside, a viper along the path, that bites the horse's heels so that its rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. Gad shall be raided by raiders, but he shall raid at their heels. Asher's food shall be rich. and he shall yield royal delicacies. Naphtali. Naphtali is a doe let loose. He gives beautiful words. Joseph. Asterisk. Joseph is a fruitful bough. A fruitful bough by a spring. Its branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained steady. His arms were made agile by the mighty one of Jacob, by the shepherd, the rock of Israel, by the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of the eternal mountains. The bounties of the everlasting hills, may they rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. Benjamin. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is what their father spoke to them. Each received a blessing, according to his own destiny. Then Jacob commanded them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers. In the cave in the field of Ephron, the Hittite, in the cave at Machpelah, east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan. There Abraham and Sarah were buried. There Isaac and Rebekah were buried, and there I buried Leah. When Jacob finished giving instructions, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Then Joseph fell upon his father's face, wept over him, and kissed him. He commanded the physicians to embalm his father, and they did so. For 40 days were required. All Egypt wept for him 70 days. When the time of mourning passed, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's household, If I have found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh for me, saying, My father made me swear. Behold, I am about to die. In the tomb I dug for myself in Canaan. There you shall bury me. Now therefore, let me go and bury my father, then I will return. Pharaoh said, Go, bury your father, as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of Egypt, and the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. It was a procession, vast and solemn, a caravan of grief and honor. They came to the threshing floor of Atad, beyond the Jordan, and there they lamented with great sorrow 7 days. The Canaanites saw it and said, This is a grievous mourning for the Egyptians. Therefore the place was called Abel Mizraim, the mourning of Egypt. His sons carried him into Canaan, and buried him in the cave of Machpelah, the burial place of Abraham and Isaac. After the burial, they returned to Egypt, but Joseph's brothers feared and said among themselves, Perhaps Joseph will hate us and repay us for all the evil we did to him. So they sent a message, saying before he died, Your father commanded, say to Joseph, Forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. Now, please forgive us the servants of the God of your father." When Joseph heard these words, he wept. His brothers came and fell down before him, saying, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said with gentleness, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about the saving of many lives, as it is today. Now therefore, do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." He comforted them and spoke kindly to their hearts. Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's household. He lived 110 years. He saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were counted as his own. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones up from here." So Joseph died, being 110 years old. He was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. The book of Genesis ends with both mourning and promise. Jacob, the father of nations, rests with his ancestors. Joseph, the savior of his family, passes on hope. The words of Joseph, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good," shine. As the heart of Genesis, God turns brokenness into blessing, betrayal into salvation, exile into destiny. The coffin in Egypt is not a symbol of despair, but of expectation. Joseph's bones rest there only for a time, awaiting the day when God will bring his people home. Genesis closes like a great lullaby. The story began with creation, and it ends with a promise. From the first breath of life to the final whisper of death, God is present, guiding, redeeming, and preparing his people for what is yet to come. Genesis closes, yet it is not the final period. It is a doorway flung open toward hope that God is faithful, and what he has promised will surely come to pass. This story reminds us, when we walk in the light, God is with us. When we lose our way in the shadows, God is still with us. When we falter and fall, he upholds us, turning even what was meant for harm into good. Genesis ends in Egypt, the place where God's people sojourn for a time. Yet there, the seed of a nation is being planted, prepared for deliverance and for a promise far greater still. And even now, the story echoes like a sacred lullaby. Fear not, for I am with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Close your eyes, breathe in deeply, and let your breath out slowly. Let every worry of the day dissolve, like small waves fading into a calm and endless sea. Let your soul grow light, like a feather lifted gently by the wind. In this stillness, remember, God is always beside you. He is with you in the light of morning, in the darkness of the long night, and even in the deepest sleep. Whisper in your heart, Lord, I entrust everything to you, and listen as his gentle voice replies, do not be afraid, for I am always with you. Even as you sleep, I watch over you and cover you with everlasting love. Allow yourself to drift into a peaceful rest, where even your dreams are filled with the radiance of his light. In those dreams, you will see him smiling, reaching out his hand to guide you. And when you awake, carry this truth within your heart. Love as he loves. Forgive as he forgives. Live in peace, for he is forever with you. Now, slow your breath. Let your heart rest in the embrace of the one who created you. Sleep peacefully in the eternal love of God.